I've made over 100 YouTube videos with my Sony camera, all focused on helping people get the most out of theirs. But if I could go back to that very first video and give myself some advice, here's exactly what I'd say about making your footage look great and doing it consistently. Because honestly, some days my videos would look great,
and then the next one, even with the same settings, something would just look off.
The colors and tones would be nice one day, and a total mess the next. One moment I'd feel confident and fast navigating the camera, and the next I'd be fumbling and frustrated. And that little voice would creep in. Maybe I should just use my phone, or why don't my videos look as good as everybody else's? What I finally realized is I don't need more gear. I just need to learn the right systems, the repeatable habits and settings that make your camera work for you as opposed to against you. And that is exactly what I'm going to share with you in this video. Auto mode made things easy, and honestly, the results looked pretty good. But over time, I just started to feel stuck. The footage started to get a bit unpredictable, and I couldn't help that nagging feeling that I wasn't getting the most out of these cameras. But then it clicked. It wasn't about completely ditching auto cold turkey. It was about understanding where practicing with manual mode fit in, and that changed everything. So let's say it's day one, you first get your camera, you get it out of the box, you're all excited. This is where it's like make or break at this point. You can kick it into auto, because you get your camera, you're thinking, I'm gonna start producing, I wanna start making videos with this new camera. You might go online, maybe watch one of my videos and find out that you need to be in manual mode to get the most out of it, so you kick it over to manual, and then you're not gonna be all that excited with your results because you haven't quite learned manual yet. This is the big epiphany for me, is get your camera out, put it in auto on day one. Put it in auto and get your shots. You got your camera, you're excited, you want to make stuff. Put it up on social media. Use it however you're going to use it. While doing that though, and making your videos, put it into manual mode for practice shots. At least for me, practice shots have been so important to dial in my skills and making videos that nobody's ever going to see. And over time, what happens while you're in auto, producing videos, and you're behind the scenes, no one's looking, in manual mode practicing, what happens over time, so let's just say after some practice, you might find that some of your manual skill sets are becoming maybe some of your produced videos while you're still producing in auto and still obviously practicing in manual. And yes, at some point when mastery is there, manual mode is what you're going to be utilizing to produce all of your videos. And at least for me, I am just as fast in manual as my camera is in auto. My results are way more predictable, and I'm actually able to get the most out of the camera because auto is going to hold you back a little bit. For the rest of this video, we'll be in manual mode so you can see all the settings that you need to see. If you're stuck in auto, you're not going to be able to see everything that I'm going to be showing you. So 2 ways to get your camera into manual mode. The first one, maybe your camera has a dial up top, or you can just spin it into the M for manual. Okay, and if you don't have that dial on top of your camera, you can put your camera in manual mode just by getting into the menu. So once you're in the menu, hit that menu button on your camera. You can just scroll down to your shooting tab. I'm going to kick over to the right. I'm going to go down to shooting mode. And once you're here, you're going to go down to shoot mode and click on that, and you can toggle through and find the M for manual exposure. And now your camera is in manual and everything is going to be completely adjustable. When it came to exposure, it always felt like a guessing game. I wasn't sure which tools to trust. The histogram, maybe the metering mode to expose it to 0.0 or 0.3 or overexpose to 1.0. Or maybe I should just look at the back of the camera and eyeball it. And then things just kept coming out, whether it was way too dark, way too bright. It can never be consistently and systematically just right. But then I found a tool built into the camera that completely eliminated all of that guesswork. And it made getting perfect exposure really fast and incredibly consistent. It's called Zebras, but before we get into how to use them and why they're so powerful, there's a few things you have to understand first. This is the Ansel Adams exposure chart, and it tells us what to expose things to. Don't overthink it right now. Just simply try to understand. You can screenshot this chart if you want to, but understand this chart. Okay, so as an example, if I wanted to expose my skin tone, right, just a kind of a pale white skin tone, I would expose that to 70. And like a super bright highlight where you want a little bit of detail still in the highlights, that would be 90. Pure white, no details in the highlights whatsoever, that would be 100. Okay, just as examples, it tells us almost anything. This chart will tell us almost anything we want to shoot, what the proper value numerically of exposure is. Next, we have to actually turn zebras on in camera. How we're going to do that? Back in the menu system here, and I'm going to scroll down to exposure and color, kick over to the right, and then I'm going to go down to zebra display. Once I'm in zebra display, first off, this is just a quick on-off. Okay, I want to make sure that those are toggled on so we're actually seeing zebras on our camera screen. I'll show you that in 2 seconds. Make sure those are turned on. Next, zebra level. Okay, once we go here, we're going to see some numbers that look pretty familiar, and yes, these match the chart we just looked at. So if my zebra values are set to 70, that would indicate, just like the chart, the exposure value of 70, 80, 90, and 100. What I like to use though, because you get a little more flexibility, whether it's C1 or C2 doesn't matter. Let's just go to C1. This can either be standard range or lower limit. I like lower limit a lot more than standard range, and then you can just manually adjust the values here. You can get a lot more precise, and we can actually get a little bit lower on the value than what some of those presets were. I think the lowest preset, is 70. Okay, but let's workshop that and make this all really just sink in. Okay, for this demo, I'm going to be using the Sony MNC app. Right, you guys can see that up on screen right now. It's going to be controlling this camera, and the zebra displays that you see on the back of your camera is the exact same on how this app shows it. Interface is just a little bit different, but this allows me to show you guys actually showing zebras showing up on screen. Just pretend that this phone or this display that you guys are seeing is the back of your camera. Okay, so we're already seeing some zebras here. All right, let's talk through this though. Let's say that I wanted to expose this skin tone right here to 70. Yeah, that skin tone to 70. It's very similar to my skin tone. I want to expose that to 70. Here's how I would do that. First off is, again, the interface here is going to be a little bit different than what's on your camera that we just looked at. But the first thing I would do is I would set my zebra level to 70, that lower limit to 70. This is that same exact thing, lower limit to 70. Okay, check. That's good. Make sure zebras are turned on like we just looked at. Okay, so we're locked in with our zebra values set to 70. Now we are seeing zebras across, like we're seeing zebras up here. We're seeing them on this light. I point to that. This light here, a little bit of a lag, that light. Okay, we're seeing zebras on the display. But I want you guys to think about this thing that's called subject of exposure. And you're going to really narrow your focus here. Subject of exposure. I don't care about zebras where they're showing up at all. I just want to find the value by using the exposure in my camera. We'll go through it to where zebras are just barely showing up on that palette there, representing a skin tone of 70. I'm going to completely disregard anywhere else where they're showing up. They're just indicators, because I have them set to 70, showing me that something in the frame is exposed to 70 or higher than 70, and that light back there is probably at over 100. These white palettes here are probably somewhere around 90 with what I'm looking at right now, but I just want to see 70. So all that I'm going to do, okay, if I can't increase the light in the scene, really quick crash course in exposure. This camera that's recording this color palette is recording in 30 frames per second. Yeah, that means that my shutter speed is going to be 1/60. Whatever frame rate you're recording in, you want your shutter speed to double that. So 30 frames a second, shutter speed 1/60. If I was recording in 24 frames a second, I would want to shutter double 24, 1/48, or 1/50 if that's what the closest your camera can get. That's how you're going to maintain natural motion blur of a shot. Okay, so I can't change that, because if I could change that, let's say I wanted to lower that, right, I would be increasing the exposure, making it brighter, and we're seeing zebras on our target subject of exposure there, but I can't use shutter speed to change that. I could also change my f-stop, right? If I had a lens that let me get lower, I could make that a lower number, and that would make the scene brighter, and we're seeing zebras on our target color palette, our target subject of exposure there. But let's say I couldn't go lower than f2.8. Maybe it was a standard zoom lens. I couldn't go lower than f2.8, and I can't increase the light in the scene. Okay, so that means we just have one more thing that we can utilize to increase the brightness of the scene to try to get zebras to show up on that color palette, and that is ISO. If I bring my ISO up, I'm going to push it to I'm going to bring my ISO up to 800. Okay, it's at 800, and now we're seeing zebras appearing on that target subject of exposure skin tone of 70. And this would actually be my exposure for the shot, right? So that's how that shot would look if we finished the exposure right here, and that is the correct exposure. But this is where people get a little bit confused. Let me just bring the ISO like way down. We'll go through this again. Okay, so what you're doing is you're just going through click by click of ISO in this case. Okay, click by click of ISO until the zebras are just barely start to appear. We know it's 800. And that's your exposure. You don't want to go higher than that. Again, we're just looking for what value did they just start to appear, and that would be our exposure. And if you look at the shot that we just got, that's exposed extremely well. One little note on that, while you're doing it, you want to make sure that your subject, in this case, this is the subject, you want to make sure that your subject is facing the main light source, because if I did that same exercise like that, where it wasn't facing the same light source, and then I put my subject in the light source, that wouldn't be so good. So that zebra method works for like almost anything. Just pick your subject of exposure. I just, like this shot right now, I would be the subject of exposure. Everything else was exposed incorrectly. As long as this was right, it would be a good thing for the scene. Then you can work on like how to light the scene in different like later phases. But just in short, it's almost like, let's say I was at like a stadium, right? And I was an announcer, and you would want to hear the announcer, right? Like on the recording, like at home watching TV, if like the people in the background were like way too quiet and you couldn't hear them, or maybe they were way too loud and like peak, that would be kind of annoying. But nonetheless, you want to make sure that the announcer's volume is perfect. That's kind of the same thing as like when you're looking at a scene, what's the thing that you absolutely want to make sure has the right brightness to it? That's your subject of exposure. And then simply just use the zebra method. If that's a product and maybe it's like a bright white product, I would set my zebra value to 90. Do that method to where zebras just barely show up on that product, and that's my exposure for the shot. So works for anything. You just got to make sure you know what your subject of exposure is in the first place. Sony cameras are known for having amazing autofocus, but I kept running into issues where maybe the camera was focusing on the wrong thing, or worse, I'd get this really distracting kind of pulsing happening on my footage. But once I dialed in a few settings, everything changed. Suddenly, I could trust the autofocus and actually get sharp, professional-looking results every single time. In the menu here, I'm going down to this AF/MF tab and number 2 here, focus area. Okay, I'm going to click on focus area, and you're met with this screen. And there's only 3 that I use. Okay, so wide. If you're in wide, the camera is going to try to use the entire frame to find something to focus on. That can be good, can be bad at times too. Let me explain zone to show you why wide can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. I'm going to select that, and I can move my zone point. Let's just center this one up for now. And the camera is going to be only using what's within, in this case, that white box to look for a focus point. Okay, so like the shot that y'all are looking at, this is a zone focus shot. Okay, because I don't want the camera to be in wide and maybe it makes a mistake and focuses like on that light, right? Like a camera over here, maybe you'll try and focus on that. I want it to prioritize and make sure that it is absolutely focusing on my face. So I'm reducing the odds that it can focus somewhere else. Okay, so I like zone for vlog stuff. A shot like this, it tends to work extremely well. Back over here though, back in my focus area, I like using wide. Again, the entire frame. If I want to do like touch to track something, that way it's tracking across the entire frame. I'll usually use wide for like fast moving subjects, slow motion shots, things like that. Talking head vlog, I'll use the zone thing. And then the other one that I like, I don't use center fix, I don't use spot. I like expand spot. It's like a tiny version of zone. Let's just put that somewhere in the middle for now. I think that's perfect middle right there. You can obviously move it around, but it's going to try to prioritize that center box to find a focus thing in there, or it'll have a little bit of space on each side of that to grab focus. I like using this for things that need really precise focus. Typically, it's just things like products where that's going to be really valuable. The other thing in this same menu, just on number 1 up here, make sure that you're in continuous autofocus. Manual focus, none of this will work, and manual focus is a conversation for a different day. But there's 2 things here: autofocus transition speed and autofocus subject shift sensitivity. Okay, so out of box, the camera is cranked up as fast as possible, which sounds good. Tend to think that like, oh, we want the autofocus to be really fast, which in some cases you do, more often than not. Transition speed is just how fast, like let's say that I had the camera focused on me and then I put something up in front of the lens and it focused on that. Just how fast does it transition to that thing? And then the subject shift sensitivity is how responsive is it to grab that thing, right? If I want it to be kind of like sticky or locked on, we'd be way down here at 1, which actually for a shot like this, I bring these transition speeds and subject shift sensitivities, that's hard to say. I bring those all the way down to 1 for a shot that you guys are looking at right now, because I don't want it to try to focus. I want to reduce the odds that it's going to do anything other than focus directly on my eye, and has to be really hard for the camera to jump off of my eye. Talking head, vlog stuff, interviews, I'm almost always going to have this on locked on and slow. That's going to reduce the odds it grabs focus somewhere else. It's also going to make sure, what I tend to find is that when you have these things cranked, that's when you'll get some of that like pulsing on the edges of your frame, because it's trying to do way too much with the focus. So you can just bring that all the way down and reduce that. However, I do have these things cranked up when I am tracking fast moving subjects. I want this to keep up with the fact that that subject is changing in the focal plane pretty frequently. A good rule of thumb for me is like fast moving subjects, bring both of these up. For slow moving subjects or like interviews or shots like this, bring those all the way down. White balance was one of those settings that I almost never thought about. I would just flip it into auto and figured everything would be fine with these modern cameras. But over time, I started noticing that something was just off. Whether it was the skin tones just looking a bit weird, or worse, the colors and tones would just kind of shift from cool to warm throughout the shot for no reason. But then I learned how to manually set my white balance quickly and accurately, and it instantly gave my footage a more polished and pro look. First thing we need to do though is know how to access and customize white balance in camera. I'm back in my menu. We're going to get away from zebras, but actually in the same exact tab, this exposure and color tab, we see white balance. And what you're going to do is you're going to go into this top one here, just this white balance menu item. We're going to click that, and your camera is likely out of box all the way up here in auto white balance. And what I'm going to have you guys do is you're going to scroll down, and we're going to go to this C temp/filter. We're going to push to the right, and what that's going to allow us to do is that's going to allow us to actually just change this Kelvin value pretty drastically. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to use just a white card. Okay, you can use a piece of paper as long as it's like completely flat and not wrinkled up and getting some weird shadows on it. Or you can pick up, like, this one's way overpriced. Don't get this one, but you can get just a relatively inexpensive, like $10. Photography white card. They work great. I'll put a link for one of those down below. Okay, and once you're here, the goal is actually really simple. Yeah, this is how you nail your white balance and make your colors and tones look really good. Similar to exposure, you're going to make sure that your reference white point is facing the light source. You're also going to make sure that you get your exposure of that same angle dialed in. Get your exposure dialed in like we already talked about and learned, okay? Once it's facing the light source and exposed well, literally all you're going to do here is you're just going to adjust this Kelvin value until that white card looks pure white to your eye. That's it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so up here is probably a little too warm. It has too much of like an orange hue to it. And then way down here, it probably has a little bit of like too much of a blue hue to it. You can cheat too. If you know, like my main light source is at 5600 Kelvin. If you match those two things, like your in-camera setting to the key light's main light source, it's usually pretty close. Okay, but you're just going to be adjusting that Kelvin temperature until that white card looks white. And once you're there, okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to lock that. We're going to lock that one in, and that would be the white balance for this shot. What I would encourage you to do additionally is that you're going to hold this white card up while it's facing the light source, hold it up in frame for the first few frames of a shot, and then you can get rid of it, because what you're going to do with that is you're going to use it in your editing software, whether it's DaVinci, Premiere, Final Cut. This is Premiere, but you're going to get the color picker, okay, the white balance selector, and right now the values of white balance, the tint, and the temperature, those are all zeroed out. But when you click the white card, it's going to make some minor adjustments. That's the goal here. You want tiny tweaks. If you get really close, it'll be tiny tweaks. It's going to make some minor adjustments for you. It's going to notice that you want that part to be pure white, and that's going to be your white balance. You're locked in. It won't shift and change like auto white balance, and your colors and tones are going to have that pro look. Out of the box, the cameras just didn't feel intuitive for me. The default settings made it kind of frustrating and slow to get set up for a shot, especially when I needed to move quickly. Then I realized that you can customize pretty much everything in the camera, all the buttons, the settings, the dials, the menus. And once I dialed it in, it completely changed how fast and smooth everything felt. With the settings, there's a little bit of a game changer in here. So out of box, again, I don't love how the camera comes out of box in terms of how intuitive it isn't for getting your shots you need and the settings you want. So if you scroll down in your menu here to the setup menu, we're going to go to the right and you're going to go to a scary tab. It says Operation Customize. And you can do this for both photo and video. I'm just going to go into video for now. And yours will look different. I have mine mapped out differently, but you can change these. Yeah, so, and it's just if you're just showing you that orange highlighter on the right side of that camera display, like what you're changing, what button you're actually changing. Let's just go to my one tab here. Okay, you can click on that. Okay, again, yours won't say white balance. Out of box, it says something different, but you can go through the entire menu system and you can remap that to something else. Maybe you wanted that to be your audio record level. Boom. Now, in this case, for this camera, the trash cam button is now my audio record level, but I like to actually have that one set as my white balance. So I just select white balance, and that way I can change my white balance like we learned today. Show you guys some of my favorite ones to customize. I won't have time to go through all of them in this video, but I'll show you some of my favorite ones to customize. So on my first tab here, I already showed you that I make sure that I have one button selected to white balance. Zebra display select is my center button, and that just allows me to toggle zebras on or off. I'll toggle it on to get exposure, and I'll usually get rid of them because they can be distracting after I have exposure. Zebra level, I push left on my wheel and it allows me to pull up to different values that we looked at earlier to set my zebra values to. Okay, so those two going together, the buttons are really close together. I can turn zebras on or off and I can select the level. That's one little hack for you guys about how to get your exposure really quickly. ISO is the right on this wheel for this camera, and that allows me just to change my ISO level. So those three things together are pretty important for getting your exposure dialed in. And then focus area, I can quickly just press down on that and change from wide to zone to expand spot. But there's a lot that you can do to customize these cameras and get the settings that you need.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, this would be like maybe
real quick.
Maybe 20 seconds.
It gives me almost no time for these. Anyways, your camera has over 100 settings, but you really only need 16 to get good looking videos and photos. Most people get really overwhelmed and it ruins their confidence with their camera. But you don't have to struggle with your settings, and that's exactly why I put together this really simple course to give you the essential and best settings for your videos and photos so that you can stop guessing and fumbling with your camera and start shooting with confidence. And the best part, to lock it all in, I put together an interactive quiz to make all those settings automatic for you. It's normally $50, but you can pick it up right now for only 27 bucks. You can learn a lot more about that. I'll put a link in the description for you to check it out. How are we doing on that time? He's gonna be mad.
And he didn't get that in 20 seconds, did he? Yeah, he never does. I used to make this mistake all the time where I would shoot something, load it into Premiere Pro, and then realize that no picture profile in the camera, no LUT in post-production, nothing was going to really save poorly shot footage. If the exposure was off or the white balance was incorrect, no matter how much effort or tweaks I made in post, nothing was going to make it look right. Once I was able to nail the focus, the exposure, the white balance in camera, everything got faster and easier, and my footage looked how I actually wanted it to. There's this famous story about this basketball skills coach who was invited to watch Kobe Bryant at the peak of his career. Watch him go practice one day. It was like 4 a.m. and this basketball skills coach goes in and proceeds to watch Kobe Bryant for multiple hours. Practice the basics. Practice the jump shot, practice layups, practice free throws, practice basic dribbling and passing. the basics. So after hours of this skills coach watching Kobe Bryant do these basics, he walks up to him and has a second to ask him, said, "Kobe, you're the best player in the world. Why are you doing all this basic stuff?" And Kobe looked at him and said, classic Kobe one-liners, but Kobe looked at him and said, "Why do you think I'm the best in the world? I'm never bored with the basics." And I really think that that is critically important when it comes to how you think about your camera. If I was just starting out, I wish I would have never touched something like S-Log3 in the early days or tried to buy a bunch of LUTs to make my footage look good, when the truth was, nothing's going to save badly shot or poorly shot footage. You have to get it right in camera, as close as possible. Your exposure has to be good. Your white balance has to be close. Things have to be in focus, and you have to be able to navigate your camera quickly to be able to get the shots that you want to. And when you have the confidence to navigate your camera, you can just focus on getting the shots you want as opposed to thinking about what settings to use and how long it's going to take you to get there. Anyways, I wish when I was first starting out that I just took all picture profiles off the camera. No S-Log3, maybe S-Cinetone if my camera had access to it, because it's kind of like no picture profile, but I would have no picture profile or S-Cinetone and just get good at making the footage look good in camera so that when I got into post and I wanted to do small color grades or add some finishing LUTs, just that extra little style on top of already correctly shot footage, and that's how you make your stuff truly look great. If that part earlier about white balance really hit you and you want to finally get that dialed in, you're going to want to check out this video where I go way deeper on that topic, and the comments are full of people where they're saying that this video made it finally click. Anyways, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. See ya.